So one last thing before we bring Nancy on, I just wanted to cover something, which is like I went and asked my patron Discord, like, is there anything people want to see us cover when we talk about protest and riot tactics? And someone asked me this question: is it better to protest where it causes the most disruption or gets the most attention? The examples they gave were, this is UK specific, would it be better to do a protest outside Parliament or like a stop protest, where like a sit-in protest where you stop the traffic on the M25?
Right,
And
yeah.
so
So like attention versus disruption,
right,
basically.
it's kind of interesting conversation, but like the quickest thing here to understand is like every protest is going to sit on a scale, and not just protest, but all forms of protest. So some forms of what we would call direct action, you wouldn't call like a traditional protest, right? Sit on a scale between getting attention and causing disruption. In How to Blow Up a Pipeline, first recommend, and it's the book we've been recommending over and over again. There it is again, How to Blow Up a Pipeline by Andreas Malm. He talks about resistance as opposed to protest, right? There's where people are choosing to stop systems that are harming people, right? And that's the one end of the spectrum. Is like someone's chaining themselves to a bulldozer, or they just refuse to let something happen. And that is one end of the spectrum, and the other one is about getting attention and raising awareness for something. And I think I put some examples in here, right? So okay, attention grabbing marches, right? The Women's March, Pride marches, the Million Man March, those were all attention grabbing, right? But they weren't disrupting anything or doing direct resistance to something. Unlike the suffragettes went around smashing in windows and blowing shit up, the climate camps, which stopped oil refineries from working, Seoul at Yamato, like Tim, you talked about Yamato a bunch, but like, you know, there's like good examples around that where like people have been disrupting and stopping
like actually stopping
from
developers, like, you know, getting in front of the bulldozers and stuff.
Exactly.
But that's like the whole thing about like the suffragettes, right? It's like, you know, a lot of the time, like people just act as if they were just, you know, sitting around like singing songs.
Oh yeah,
and,
totally.
You know, like all that kind of stuff. But like, no, they were like petrol bombing places, smashing windows and stuff. But it's only this kind of like liberal view of history that it's like, oh man, like those noble women that just kind of, you know, like show, you know, what do they turn the other cheek and whatever, you know, just bullshit like
that. So it's illegal to mail a person in the Royal Mail in the UK now. And it wasn't before the suffragettes, because women were banned from Parliament, and they found the only way to get a woman into Parliament was they mailed one in. But yeah,
what the fuck?
Yeah,
They like go around and like they smashed up the Prime Minister's house and stuff. And
yeah,
they
did all
like,
sorts
next time
of
we'll
shit,
set it on fire. Like,
yeah, but they didn't actually. This is a crucial thing actually, and again, Andreas Malm does talk about this a little bit in How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Like, they didn't kill anybody, they didn't even hurt anybody. They only engaged in property destruction to make a point and to disrupt and to damage the systems, not people. And that is a point leading on to what I was going to say, right? If you're like stopping traffic on the M25, for my non-cursed people who luckily live outside the UK, the M25 is a big ring road that exists around London, and it's like a lot of traffic that's like trucks and lorries and vans and just ordinary people trying to get on with their lives. Yes, you'll be disrupting a lot if you go and sit in the M25 and stop traffic from moving and cause a huge traffic jam, and everyone will think you're a dick. Everyone will think you're a dickhead, and they will not be sympathetic to your cause. I'm not just talking about like because the UK public are so reactionary. For sure they are. Not just because the media can spin it that way, but like you're actively making it super easy for the media to spin it that way, right? And that's another thing that Andreas Malm talks about, is he talks about examples of like Extinction Rebellion activists who glued themselves to the top of London Underground trains, and that stopped them from going. And then the crowd were just like a ton of working class commuters who had to get to work, and loads of them were like yelling at these guys who were like middle class white guys, right? Hey, I just need to feed my family and you're stopping me getting to work, you fucking piece of shit. Like a black guy tried to climb up and like get one of them down, and the guy, who again, middle class white guy, like kicked him in the head to like shove him off. And like, so let's just think about optics for a second. I know we hate thinking about optics, but like that's like this middle class white guy literally just kicked a black guy in the head. Not a great look for Extinction Rebellion. Really turned the public mood against them incredibly hard. By contrast, the first big Extinction Rebellion protest was one where they shut down all the central bridges of London by camping on them. The central bridges in London, Central London is incredibly bougie. It's all students and like upper class dickheads and finance guys and and like the MPs, right, who are trying to do all their ruling class shit, right? And if you shut down those bridges, that's kind of based. It's
There's no
attention
working class
grabbing.
people going to visit, going to work.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like it's disruptive and attention grabbing and good. So like the thing is, to some degree, unless what you're doing is just chaining yourself to a bulldozer in the middle of middle of nowhere to stop a forest from getting knocked down, you always need to think about optics. And so like the example of the M25 is a bad one, but I'm glad that my Patreon supporter suggested that, because I wanted to talk about like why that's bad. But that's all about planning protests, so that's not really what we're here to talk about today. I just wanted to go over some of that stuff because I thought it was a pretty interesting distinction.
Mm-hmm. Also, I think it's important to remember, what is the purpose of a protest? Like, I know we hate talking about optics, but like, in my opinion, the purpose of a protest is quite literally to get eyes onto an issue, right?
Right.
Beyond that, if you're stopping, say, like a supply chain or whatever, and then I think you could probably also, this is just my own definition, you could probably also call that a protest, but I think it goes beyond a protest and more toward more into like an actual, maybe like a strike or something like that, or a boycott or whatever.
This is where we blur the lines between forms of protest and direct actions.
But I just want to make sure I note that, because like optics is like a cringe word when you see it all over the internet, but because maybe we should even just find another way to talk about it, because the word optics is so fucking gross at this point. But the idea of like what is the purpose of a protest? Is the purpose of a protest to like, we're gonna end racism by like being in the street and chanting about it? Like that typically isn't, that's like, in my opinion, protests exist to force people to acknowledge like outrage at the state of things. And in that regard, I think the fact that like the noticing is the goal, and therefore you need to craft that noticing. You need to craft what they are noticing. What are they noticing? They're noticing like one guy just like screaming in the middle of a freeway, or that's the face of like Black Lives Matter or something. You know,
I think like there's like a lot of stuff as well, you know, like with like a protest can be an act of you know, like legitimate disruption. Like, you know, we get this a lot with like, you know, these kind of issues over like land back and things like that, where it's like there is the optics or whatever being seen, and then there's also like, you know, we are here to physically disrupt this development, you know, like that is the goal. But then, you know, there's like, obviously like optics wise, there's like a huge difference between like a random person by themselves that goes and like, you know, does something to disrupt this thing, like whether it's like, you know, what might be, I don't know, I don't want to like talk too specifically about things that, you know, a lone person might do, but then like versus like a mass movement of people working together that can be seen, you know, like there's two very different ways that this can be framed in the media and be seen and all this kind of stuff like that. And I think like the goal is to like, I mean, I think like, you know, actually let's not talk too much about either of those things, because I'm being careful, but
sure.
But I think that like you know, when we're living in an age where like, you know, like everything is like put on TV and everything, like the media do control the narrative about these protests, like even with, you know, things like Iamata, where it's like it was very hard for them to frame it in a negative light. They were still searching for absolutely any angle that they could to be like, you know, like, oh no, like these people are like, you know, like they're terrorists or they're doing something like that, you know, whatever like that. So it's like, even though that some protests do, you know, and a lot of them do have like a very physical, like we have like a concrete objective with this. We're not just doing it to be seen or anything like that. I think that you know, that element of how you're being perceived is still super strong, even in those situations, right?
Yeah, definitely. Goblin Breakfast in chat said, I remember in Poland, even a few tram and bus drivers would try and help protests by stopping the vehicle, helping to block and or display messages. And that's really, really cool. And it also reminds me of something that Matilda from the IWW, who I did an organizer interview with and also will be on the show in a few weeks, told me that there was a protest in Japan, or it was a strike, where bus drivers they struck not by actually stopping working. They carried on driving the buses, but they just didn't charge any passengers. And I just thought it was really fucking based.
A couple times, and it's, it's really good, and it works really well because, you know, like the public immediately are like, yes, this is cool. Like, you know, like, wait, why are you doing this or whatever? You know, and like the bus drivers were just leading people on and being like, don't worry about it. You know, like we're, you know, this is an action that like an industrial action thing that we're doing, whatever. We're not getting paid enough. So, you know, you guys ride free. Don't worry about it. It's on the business today, sort of thing, you know, which, you know, is awesome. That's happened like maybe twice in the last couple of years, and each time has been successful. So
hell yeah. Yeah. I think let's wrap up this discussion and bring Nancy on. But I just want to read out a message that Nat put in chat, which is Andreas Malm. This is true. This is a really good point to bring up from the book. Specifically talks about striking targets that are associated with the harm that people are doing. So like we get this association of self-defense. Like something he advocates for is for people to basically do a big protest that is like an attack on, you know, whatever like climate destructive thing every time there is some kind of big natural disaster, so that people so that just like everybody else is thinking, right, every time there's a natural disaster, people are protesting. That's because it's a thing that can be stopped, you know. And it's that's a way to think of it. But that's all organizing protests. Let's bring in Nancy on, and we can hear about what to do if you're suddenly caught up in a protest that turns natural.
Hell yeah.
And as you will soon find out, you cannot defeat an enemy that you cannot see.